Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Josh Barnes, and I'm the founder of Noah's Place, and tonight am hosting tonight's event called Send Reform Explained What Families Need to Know Right Now. Because over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of conversation about proposed changes to the SEND system in England. Many parents have seen headlines, read posts online, and understandably have so many questions about what these changes might mean for their children. Tonight is not about politics, it's about clarity. And our aim this evening is simple: to explain what is being proposed, to explore what those changes might mean in real life, and to answer some of the questions families are asking. And at the end of tonight's panel discussion, we will have a Q&A section, so please, if any questions come to mind, please add them in the chat. We'll be moderating it through the night, and we'll be picking as many as we can to answer at the end of tonight's panel. But before we get into the discussion, I'd like to briefly just share why this matters so much to me personally. Noah's Place exists because of my son Noah. And like many families here tonight, our journey has involved navigating systems that can feel confusing and at times incredibly isolating. Along that journey, we've met so many other parents and families and carers facing those same challenges. Families fighting to be heard. That's why we've started Noah's Place. We're currently bringing to life a new kind of community hub here in West Yorkshire. And even though we're just starting out, we've already proven and grown to a community of over 2,000 families across the region, all pledging that Noah's Place is needed right now. Our mission is simple too: to create calm, welcoming spaces where neurodivergent and disabled children and their families feel understood and connected. Because support shouldn't come after families reach crisis point, it should always come before. And that idea is right at the heart of tonight's discussion. Because when we talk about SEND reforms, we aren't talking about abstract policy. We are talking about our children's lives and our families' experiences. Before we begin, there's one really important thing that I want to emphasise. Right now, nothing has legally changed. The proposals we're discussing tonight is the start of a national conversation, and any real changes would need to go through consultation and Parliament before coming law. And after tonight, if you want your voices heard, we'll send a link out to the consultation so that you can have your voices heard in the SEND reform. So tonight is about understanding the discussion. So I want to start by briefly summarising some of the key ideas that have been discussed in the proposed reforms from the government. The government has acknowledged that the current SEND system is not working well enough for many children, families, schools and local authorities. Many parents already know this through lived experience. The proposals suggest several key directions. One idea is earlier support in schools, so that children receive help sooner rather than waiting until needs escalate. Another proposal is improved access to specialist professionals, such as therapists and specialists who can support children and the school. There is also discussion around additional investment in mainstream provision, helping schools support more children within their own setting. However, one of the most discussed areas relates to the educational health and care plans, often known as EHCPs. Under the current discussions, EHCPs would remain, but they may be only focused more on children with the most complex needs. More children may instead receive support through school-based plans, sometimes referred to as individual support plans or ISPs. For many families, however, the key issue is not what a plan is called. The key question is, will the support actually happen in real life? And that's what we want to explore tonight. To help us explore these questions, we've brought together a small panel representing different perspectives in children's lives. First, we have clinical psychologist Dr. Lucy from drlucy.co.uk. Dr. Lucy works directly with children and families and understands the impact early support can have on development and well-being. We also have head teacher Lisa Simpson, who brings insight into how schools operate and how support is delivered day to day. Joining us as well with the panel is SENCO and inclusion lead Jenny Snowden, who coordinates SEND support within schools and works closely with families navigating the system. And finally tonight we have a parent voice, Megan Taylor, who will share lived experience of navigating the system and seeking support for their children. Megan is also the co-chair here at Noah's Place. Thank you all for being here tonight. We're really excited to get into it. But before we do, we wanted to share a quick video and then we'll get into the questions. So from a really young age, we realised that Noah had some complex sensory issues. We found out quite early on, I'd probably say a little bit earlier than most parents know. So with Matea being on the autistic spectrum, we kind of saw signs in Noah very early. We decided to bring these up with different professionals, but unfortunately Noah didn't hit the age thresholds for support in the UK. So it meant that we had to wait for the support to be given. And during that time, we was going through a really difficult time. Noah spent 7 days in hospital because he completely went off the texture of food. He didn't like any textures being in his mouth, and he lost a lot of weight. He was then prescribed a milkshake diet, a high calorie, all the vitamins inside so that he could get the nutrients that he needed to have on board. We went to the doctor with many occasions. We spent many a day in A&E with Noah self-injuring himself as he couldn't communicate exactly what he wanted, and during that time for the first 6 months we couldn't have any support at all, and that was a real struggle. It was very isolating. It was a very lonely place. To see your son hurting himself on a daily basis, your marriage is on the line because of everything that's happening. You're just trying to stay as strong as you can for your little boy, all whilst trying to be a husband as well and a friend. And it was a really heartbreaking time, and we never want anybody to ever experience that loneliness ever again. So we basically came up with a solution of what we wish existed when we was journeying the journey with Noah. So Noah's Place is the answer, the solution to what we wish existed. So we're going to have an all-in-one soft play area for everybody, but a real focus around sensory rooms for adults and children with special educational needs. And not just throwing lava lamps in or string lights, but actual evidence-based that are going to help develop brains of children and adults with special educational needs. And then also a community cafe so that the parents and carers can come to a place where they really understand what's going on and be around people who understand what they're journeying. I think that's really important, especially with the loneliness and the isolation that you do feel being in that situation. Okay, fantastic. Right, let's get into the discussion tonight. I'd like to start tonight with lived experience from our parent voice, Megan. Hi, Megan. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let me just pull you up on the screen. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Megan. I'm just wondering if you could just briefly introduce yourself to everybody who's watching tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Josh. It's really great to be here tonight. So thank you for inviting me to take part. So I am mum to two amazing girls, my daughters who are 10 and 5. They're both extremely amazing, kind, creative children who also both happen to be neurodivergent. So my eldest is diagnosed autistic, and we think probably ADHD as well, but that's probably a diagnosis that'll come a little bit later. And my youngest, we think, is the same, but she is not currently diagnosed yet. We're still on the pathway for that diagnosis. And my eldest also has a PDA profile, so some people call it pathological demand avoidance profile. There are other terms that are used for it as well. But it essentially means that she really struggles with overwhelm from perceived demands on her as well, which brings with it a lot of challenges. So we probably knew from around age 4 with my eldest that there were some complexities going on and things that we just weren't really quite sure how to support her with. Both my daughters are very high masking, so in situations where they're not particularly as comfortable, so particularly outside of the home, essentially, they mask very heavily and cover up their needs and their needs for support, which then results in burnout and overwhelm when they do then come into their safe space at home. So because of that, navigating support systems when they're young is very difficult. Often the needs aren't seen in different settings, so that can be really, really challenging. And essentially, this meant that the journey from realizing that Olivia had some additional needs and that we needed some support, the journey from realizing that through to her diagnosis was very long. It did take us just over 4 years to navigate that pathway, and it's probably going to be a similar amount of time for my youngest as well. So the road is long and can feel very tiring and very fraught with challenges at times, and having to navigate that without really, especially the first half of it, without really anyone to talk to or to ask kind of what are we meant to be doing and what are the steps and what can we do at different stages to make this easier is really difficult. So one of the things that I want to highlight is just that if you're going through this, there are lots of other parents out there going through the same thing, and being able to have a space where you can talk to each other and share experiences and share knowledge is hugely important. And I know that if Noah's Place had existed when I was first navigating this journey with Olivia, it would have been somewhere where I would have been all the time to access that safe space and access that community. So yeah, it's really good to see it kind of coming into fruition. But yeah, from my side of it as a parent, that's the situation, that's the viewpoint where I'm coming from, navigating those systems through school. I have lots of experience of navigating the pieces of paper that Josh mentioned, the acronyms I always find really hard to keep in my brain. So apologies for using acronyms, but the EHCP and the ISP, we've been through the stages of getting those in place for our eldest, and we're partway through the stages of doing it for our youngest. So I can share some experiences around that as well, which will hopefully be helpful. And just to flag, Josh mentioned earlier the idea of one of the key things in the reforms of being hoping to bring earlier support in schools, so at an earlier stage before children reach crisis point. And that is one thing that I would say that as a concept would be hugely welcome and something that really could have benefited both of my girls. So hopefully that is something that we will see. But yeah, I hope my experiences can be of help this evening.
Yeah, great, Megan. There's lots of families obviously watching who have been through similar experiences, the up and downs of the SENS system. I wonder, what were some of the biggest challenges your family faced when trying to access that support?
I think one of the biggest challenges for us, and one that I know lots of families will see reflected, particularly if they have high masking children, is getting people to understand that what we are experiencing in the majority of our lives at home is vastly different to what is seen in public spaces and at school. And that is a huge challenge. And there is that kind of temptation sometimes for settings to kind of say, we did get a lot of, oh, they're fine once they're here, she's fine once she's here. And it took a really long time. And I think part of it is just them getting older and being able to verbalize it a little bit more. But it took a really long time for it to become clear to some people within different settings that actually they're not fine. They're just holding it together and coping as best they can. And the result of that for us was things like huge after school explosions and meltdowns, which can be very difficult to manage, especially if you have multiple children and you're trying to get them home safely and away from the road and into a vehicle or walking down the road to home. Also lots of kind of self-harm isn't the right word, but I think you use the term, Josh, self-injurious behaviour. Yeah. So we would have lots of things that are sensory related. So lots of biting and skin picking and chewing and things that become really painful for them, because again, the sensory overload of the day at school has a huge impact. And sometimes the way that they'll cope with that is by focusing their attention on something that they can do, like biting or chewing or lots of picking clothes. But I always say, it's like a tax on SEN families sometimes, the amount of clothes that we go through and that we have to buy because they've torn them apart or torn holes in them, or again, as a kind of a coping mechanism, or a kind of stim, a sensory stim, if you like. So that can be very difficult to deal with, and isn't always very visible in the setting. It's not something that teachers necessarily will pick up on a lot. Both of my girls very much try and regulate themselves in unseen ways where possible. Like, they don't want to be seen to be struggling. They don't want to be seen to be kind of different, even though we do talk all the time about how it is okay to be different. And that will sometimes mean that they can fly under the radar, which can be really, really difficult. I would say that one of the experiences that I expected to be the hardest was actually getting the EHCP in place for my eldest. I had heard a lot about how difficult it is and how hard you have to fight for it, and appeals processes and things. And certainly that is the experience of a lot of families. For us, it was one of the simpler bits. And I think because there'd been so much put in place before we'd got to that stage. So the school where my children go, the SEN team there are amazing. The support that they've given us as a family has been really great. And it meant that they actually they'd basically put everything in place without the EHCP. So she already had access to all of the support groups and all of the sensory breaks and all of the kind of the scaffolding that allows her to actually be in school and to engage as fully as she can. They'd put all that in place before we even got the EHCP, which was amazing. And it then kind of acted as its own evidence base for getting that EHCP. So one thing I would say is the more that you can work collaboratively with the school earlier as possible, the better. And especially with potential changes to which children will and won't be given an EHCP, the more that you can put in kind of without that earlier, the better, I think. And I think most schools would probably agree with that. There's no need to wait for a piece of paper to put the support that they need in place. So hopefully that's a helpful way of framing that.
Sure. Amazing. Thank you so much, Megan. Megan's going to just disappear for a second, and then she's going to come back in a second. We're just going to go over to another panel member. We're going to go to Dr. Lucy. Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Why don't you just briefly introduce yourself to everybody who's watching?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Josh. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Dr. Lucy Wrigley. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've been working in the field of children's mental health, neurodivergence, intellectual disabilities for over a decade now. I worked in the NHS for a long time before starting my own family and leaving the NHS to work independently. Most of my practice now is neurodevelopmental assessments, alongside supporting parents through parent consultations, specialist assessments to support EHCP processes. And so I really do understand the challenges and frustrations that families face day in, day out, navigating all of this.
Great, thank you. And again, the Q&A section will be at the end, everybody. So if you've got any questions, please pop them down through the evening. Dr. Lisa, one of the central ideas in these reforms is earlier support for children before needs escalate. From your experience working with children and family, why is early intervention so important for children with additional needs?
Mm-hmm. So from a clinical perspective, one of the most important things that we know from research and science is that children's brains are shaped by their experiences. So the earlier that we recognise a child's needs and respond to them, the more that we can influence their developmental pathway in a positive direction. So what we know from research is that targeted interventions around kind of academic needs can accelerate progress by kind of 5 or 6 months within an academic year. So we can see that there's those definite, academic impacts. But I think for most families that I work with, and my own child, it's not the academic stuff that matters. It's knowing that your child is safe and happy and feels fulfilled. And when we see our children, engaging in kind of self-injurious behaviours, showing high levels of distress, that's really difficult to manage. So I think one of the most important things that I see when support is delayed is around the psychological impact of that. And I think many more people are becoming aware of this phrase, kind of emotionally based school avoidance, or EBSA. And I think a lot of people think EBSA is about a child, refusing to go to school. But actually what we know is that EBSA kind of comes at the end point of a long period of distress and overwhelm and unmet needs, when a child begins to associate school with feeling really psychologically unsafe. So I think the latest research says around 40 to 50% of children with EBSA have special educational needs, and around 40% of autistic children have significant difficulties with their school attendance. So I can't remember who it was, but there's a recent piece of research that shows 1 in 6 autistic children haven't attended school since September 2025. So we can see that there's that real impact on not only academic performance, but on the mental health impact of that. So, again, we know that children with special educational needs are 3 to 4 times more likely to experience a significant mental health difficulty compared to their peers without any special educational needs. So we can see just how critical and important this is, for children's well-being, and also for siblings' well-being, parents' well-being, all of those other things that then kind of create this knock-on effect.
Great, yeah. And I guess one of the questions that parents will be asking as well, what can happen to a child's development and well-being when support is delayed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when support is delayed, like I've said, we do see that increase in levels of mental health needs. So increasing levels of things like anxiety and depression. I guess that overall loss of trust in the educational, system. And I think, the families that I work with have often had multiple breakdowns of educational placement where, because EHCPs are all about evidence, just like Megan's just said, and actually often you will need to evidence multiple times the environments that don't work for your child before the right one is identified. And so I see then that impact of, just like as adults, if we have these multiple experiences of, a friendship not going right or a workplace not going right, if we see that in school, there's going to get to a point where we think, actually, I don't want to trust any of these adults anymore. And so we know that when we don't feel safe, we can't learn. So to engage meaningfully in learning, we have to have that psychological safety there. And when we perceive a threat, whether that's due to anxiety, reminders of trauma, sensory overload, social uncertainty, we shift into that heightened sense of arousal, that fight or flight. And those cognitive resources are redirected towards survival rather than that higher order thinking. So as a result of that, things like attention, memory, language processing, problem solving, flexible thinking are significantly reduced. So we might see children who, might not be able to learn, might not be able to, selective mutism is a phrase that might be used. And so we know that learning requires a sense of predictability, relational safety, emotional containment. And without those, our brain can't effectively code, retain, or retrieve information in the same way. I think one of the other really important things to say here is that there's emerging research that shows that negative school experiences, including things like, restraints, bullying, repeated exclusions, contribute to trauma symptoms in young people. And once that association forms, it's really hard to reestablish that. So early support through, adapted environments, supporting communication differences, adults in that school environment co-regulating with children, never expecting children to be able to self-regulate, but that co-regulation with children is really important. So from a systems perspective, early intervention is more sustainable over time. So when we address those early needs, the likelihood of, school breakdowns, long-term mental health difficulties actually have a better impact longer term. So ultimately, I guess what I want to say is that, if the SEND reform is going to be meaningful, we really must focus on recognising those needs earlier, in supporting families earlier, in ensuring schools have access to specialist input before that distress escalates, because we know then the long-term impacts of that are much higher.
Fantastic. Thank you. Some really, really good advice there, Dr. Lucy. Dr. Lucy will be joining us in a second as well. We're just going to go over to another panel member. I'd like to introduce to the stage Lisa, who is a head teacher of a primary school in Bradford. Hi, Lisa. Why don't you just introduce yourself to everybody who's watching?
Hi, so I am head teacher of a one-form entry primary school in the centre of Bradford. We have 33% of our pupils who are currently on the SEND register, with a wide range of needs across our school. In addition to that, I am also a parent, and I identified with so many of the things that Megan said earlier. I have a 9-year-old boy who is currently in year 5 at school, and also masks massively during the day. So for me, one of the most important things is as a head teacher is that I spend time with those families and I listen to what they're telling me. Because yes, we might not see everything in school, but I believe that it's happening when they're not at school. And so it's our job, in my opinion, in every school to make sure that we are doing every single thing we can to support those children to access their day safely and happily, and meeting their needs at the earliest point.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sure when the SEND reform paper launched, it was on your desk and you was reading through it. Schools are expected to play a key role in delivering earlier support with the SEND reforms. From your experience, how realistic is it for schools to deliver more support earlier?
I think it's really encouraging to see in the white paper the suggested crossover with the Best Start reforms that are happening as well. I also sit on that board in Bradford as well, so I'm in those conversations currently. I think it can't just be schools, it has to be a joined up approach, which is, I'm hopeful that that's the way that we're heading, because often children will arrive at school aged 5 where it's almost too late. And the intervention could have happened before then if those children had been seen. So I think that that's a really encouraging step if we can start to work in a more joined up approach before children come to us, and we can find out as much as we can around what schools need to put into place for individual children from day one. I think that will make a massive difference. I think funding is also a massive issue in schools, and it's encouraging to see that there is more money being put into schools for this reason, but I'm just hopeful that that is enough for us to make enough steps forward for these children.
Yeah, that's great. I guess one question that I have at the back of that is, what challenges do schools currently face when supporting children with SEND?
So there's a couple. So first of all is around that first information that we may get from any other professionals that have been involved with children and families. At the moment, that doesn't tie together well enough, in my opinion, in first instance. But then it's around getting the right support in place for the children. So making sure that we have kind of adequate support throughout our school to meet everybody's needs at the same time. I think also one of the things that I think is also encouraging in the paper is around the training of staff. So often it's constant recruitment cycle in schools that you're trying to find the right people to meet the right children's needs, and that match is really important. So making sure that teachers, non-teachers, everybody in schools are really well informed about what children need as a base, and then what they will need to meet their individual needs, because the ISPs, the support plans, are only going to be worthwhile if we have the right resources to deliver them.
Of course, yeah, 100% agree there. Thank you so much, Lisa. We're going to go to the next panel member, who is Jenny, who is SENCO. Thank you. and then we'll get everybody back together and we will answer some questions together. But Jenny, thank you so much for joining us tonight and taking time out of your evening. Why don't you just introduce yourself to everybody watching as well?
Yeah, so my name is Jenny, and I am a SENCO at a primary school. I'm also lucky enough to be an inclusion lead across an academy, so I get to oversee 6 schools and work very closely with them and their children and their families and their staff. Inclusion's always been at the heart of everything that I do. I started my career working in a pupil referral unit, and my passion's kind of grown from there. I genuinely believe that every child deserves to be seen, to be heard, and supported, and to be able to succeed in their own unique ways. I'm lucky enough that I get to work with children on the ground and staff and really get to know them. And that collaboration, that communication across all stakeholders, parents, carers, professionals, school, all working together to make sure that the right provision is in place for the children. And we've done a lot of work across our schools to make sure that those foundations are in place at the point where the children arrive with us, whether that's in nursery, whether that's in year 4. Really getting to know them and having those open conversations with the people that know them best. I know Megan talked about schools really understanding what the children need, and we kind of pride ourselves on that, because then we can put the support in place that the children need. And just having that quality first teaching offer and those adaptations put into place without that being a challenge, because there are so many challenges that our families and young people face as they're going through life with additional needs or potential support that they might need, that actually we need to kind of reduce those barriers and support as much as we can in the first instance to bring that down a little bit for them.
Yeah, I mean, personal experience and the parents that we speak to at Noah's Place, they always tell us that the SEND system can feel really confusing. I'm just wondering if you can just explain to our audience tonight how the SEND support process usually works within a school for those who are unfamiliar or not sure of the full procedures.
Yeah, so as I said before, I guess the kind of first step is around that early identification of need, and that schools have a really secure process in place for that and what that looks like. And it might be that a parent or carer comes into school and raises concerns with a member of staff about the child. It might be that a member of staff raises concerns that actually the family haven't picked up on until whatever point. It might be that the staff members noticed it, and then it's what happens from that point, because actually it isn't just about, okay, there may be a need here. It's, okay, what can we do to support this child? And somebody's talked about, I think Lisa's talked about it, and Lucy talked about it as well, around putting the support in place and making sure that everybody understands what their responsibility is around that, and evidencing that, because we are in a system where we have to evidence that we've done things before other things can happen. And what I mean by that is you won't just walk into a school and get an EHCP. We have to really know the children and be able to pinpoint what their need is, what support we've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and that's kind of all creating a paper trail all the time, so that we're collating that evidence so that we can potentially submit for an EHCA. Hopefully the local authority agreed to assess, which may potentially lead to an EHCP. What we found in quite a lot of our schools actually is that if those adaptations and that quality first teaching is in place, actually some children don't need to get to the point where they need an EHCP. And I talk a lot about, children might have a diagnosis, they might not have a diagnosis. That shouldn't matter within a school, because that support should be there regardless. So that's something that I think we need to think about as we move forwards, and what that looks like for children, and making sure that support is there regardless of whether a child has a diagnosis of something or not.
Yeah, so if more children are supported without an EHCP, what would schools need in order to make that work effectively then?
So that's a really tricky question, because it depends what happens within the reform. If they're talking about less children having EHCPs because that support is in school anyway, then obviously that's a positive. But I know there's lots of work to be done still within the education system around actually what that support looks like for children. And I fully understand that with an EHCP comes that security of actually this is a legal document and the school can't argue with me on this. This is what has to be provided for my child. I think there's questions around if there is a reduction in EHCPs, then actually what does that look like for schools in terms of the funding? Because obviously EHCP children bring funding with them. It's never enough to match what is written within a Section F, but that's all additional support that can be put into the individual child, and rightly so. So it does bring questions around actually what funding will be in schools to support them to be fully inclusive without a child having an EHCP. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Really good. And if anybody has any questions about what Jenny's just been speaking about, please just add them in and we'll get through to them at the end of tonight's session. So next part of the webinar is I'm going to open it up to the whole panel now. Let me just work through adding everybody back into the panel. If there's a little bit of feedback, guys, you might just have to mute your microphones until you want to talk, but we're okay at the minute. One of the key ideas behind these reforms is easier support. So what needs to happen in practice for early support to genuinely work for families?
I think from my perspective, I think that there needs to be the funding there. I think that's one of the biggest things that I see, and hearing the two people from the education system themselves talking about it, it is matching the finances to the offer. Nothing can be offered if there isn't the financial element there. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And I think having the right kind of training and support, I think from my perspective, what I see is that, schools might get offered, half a day training, or they might be able to fund half a day training and inset day. And actually there isn't that kind of ongoing support to manage that. I hear of, these campaigns to kind of get people screened earlier for neurodivergence or dyslexia or whatever that is, but the rest of the system has to catch up. So, I'm sure anyone who was on a waiting list, whether that is NHS or Right to Choose, will know that that is not a quick process. And so we need to have the wider systems there. So I think there's kind of that three strands there in terms of the finances, the support, and, the wider system being able to manage that.
I would completely agree. Around the sort of the training offer, I talked about it a bit earlier, but I think it is around that ongoing revisiting. So I would like to see how they envisage the kind of specialist support offer, and whether that would be something that schools could continually dip in and out of, because I talked about recruitment and retention of staff, and that is something that is a continual learning curve, because no two children are the same, and you are always going to need some specialist support, and having that available would make all the difference.
I think, Lisa, that point about recruitment and retention of staff is really interesting. So from a parent perspective, for early support to really work, something that comes up all the time is consistency. And lots of schools do it in different ways. But obviously, as soon as you start thinking about a child, for example, like my eldest, who has very complex challenges and complex needs that are not always really obvious on the surface until you get to know her, the teachers who have worked with her for years and know her inside and out can spot it a mile off when she's dysregulated or when she's overwhelmed. But obviously, teachers change all the time. We've had some of her years during primary school where she's had teachers obviously going off on maternity or being off for long periods of sick leave, and having new teachers to deal with, TAs changing, and the level of TA support within her class changing regularly. So sometimes, they might have started out the year with 3, and then for whatever reason, they've only got 2 or sometimes even 1. And that can be massively challenging. Obviously, all schools will deal with it differently, but something which I do actually think has helped is they brought in something called I think it was called a My Profile, and it's like a 1-page, really simple document. It's got Olivia's face on it, and it's actually written in conjunction with the child as well, which we found really helpful. And it has a very basic overview of basically, these are the things that I really struggle with. These are the things that I'm amazing at. When I'm having a really hard time, these are the things that you can do as a trusted grown-up to help me regulate, or these are the things to avoid doing when and I think that is so helpful. And it's just literally a one-page document. So any new member of staff that's coming in, or if somebody's having to come in and cover for the afternoon, for example, and you've not got time to sit down and tell them about 30 different children's needs, then they can be given just that one page, like, look, here you go, just so you know, just skim your eyes over that. And I think little things like that can be really helpful in terms of making sure that just that consistency of early support is really solid, because without it, it's just massively confusing if one person is saying one thing, or you get a different type of support from one adult than you do from another. So I think, yeah, that can be really helpful. So I would hope to see more of that kind of thing in place as part of these reforms.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I think that's so important in terms of like psychological safety as well for all children, regardless of, you know, their underlying need. But especially if we think about kind of, you know, neurodivergent children who might have different kind of, you know, information processing systems, executive functioning systems, multiple people coming in, different people doing things in different ways is going to feel much, much more confusing. And that's often when we see kind of that dysregulation increasing. But I also know how impossible that must feel from schools' perspectives at times, because that again has to come with, you know, the funding and the support and the training and all of that to kind of keep people in those roles. So yeah, it isn't easy for anyone.
Great. Does anybody else want to add anything before we move on to the next question? Great. Okay. So another major concern parents have raised is around rights and protections, talking about the EHCPs and the ISPs. How can we ensure that families don't lose safeguards or protections as reforms are developed?
Sorry, I don't want to jump in if anyone else was going to talk first, but so from a parent perspective, obviously I don't have as much kind of technical knowledge of all of the legal side of it. But from what I understand is that the HCP that we do now have in place for Olivia is so that's like a legally, not legally binding, but it's a legal it's considered a legal document in a way. So it has to be acted upon, and it has to be reviewed. It has a set time frame for how often it has to be reviewed. Whereas I think in some instances with other kinds of documentation that don't have that kind of official legal stamp on it, if you like, there is the possibility for them to just it become a document that's worked on once and then put in a drawer somewhere and not looked at. And I don't think anybody would do that intentionally, because obviously everyone's really busy and nobody puts work in something and then goes, oh, but we're not actually going to pay attention to it. But I think having this, one of the things that can work well with the HCPs is having that recognised formal structure in place. Everyone knows how it works. Everyone knows how often it has to be reviewed and talked about. And that's really helpful. So I think if, as a parent who's now got one of those in place, if that was to be removed, or if, for example, for my youngest, it may be that timings wise, that we don't ever get any HCP for her, because the rules will be, and the expectations will be different by that stage. So I'm imagining that, thinking, okay, well, it doesn't matter to me what it's called. What matters to me, as Josh said, is whether it's stuck to. So as long as whatever documentation gets in place for my youngest, as long as there's a formal process and a recognised structure and a timeline that we stick to, then that's absolutely fine. And that's one of the things that the school, in my experience, were really good at prior to the EHCP, because we had I think Josh called it an ISP. I think they call it something slightly different at our school, but it's essentially a very similar thing. It's an IEP, it's an individual educational plan. And they had that in place, and they put a really good timeline in place of, right, okay, so every however many months, you'll be invited in for a meeting and we'll sit down and we'll talk about it and we'll talk about how it's going and we'll change things and we'll update it and then we'll send you the new one and we'll do that. And they did stick to it and it definitely helped. And it made it really easy for me because I could see on paper, okay, they're saying that they're going to deliver this, and this for Olivia. Okay. And then, I don't know, a month later, we would be struggling with something and she would be really struggling with overwhelm and kind of sensory challenges at school. And I could easily go in and say to them, okay, you said that you're delivering these. I just want to check, are these all still in place or has something changed? And it's a really good way to kind of reference what is and what isn't working. So I think you can do that with an HCP, you can do it with a ISP or an IEP, but it's just making sure that that process is in place. So I think as long as communication is open and everyone knows what to expect and when, it can work, if that makes sense. I feel like I was a bit rambly, but hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So the ISPs are not going to be legally enforceable from what I've read so far, but it really comes down to that partnership working between the school and the parent. So making sure that that is continually revisited, like you said. So you've got timelines, you're revisiting it, you're reviewing it, and you're making sure that what it says is happening is actually happening. Because otherwise it's just a piece of paper. So I think it's about making sure that all parties involved in that plan are kind of sticking to the delivery of it. And if something needs to change, reviewing that together with the people who know the children best, which are their parents.
And again, the staff training comes into that, doesn't it? And staff understanding their role within a child's IEP or ISP. And I would agree with what you said, Megan. Actually, it doesn't matter what the document's called, but actually there is that kind of legal and statutory requirement around an EHCP at the moment. So if they go, what does that look like for an IEP or an ISP? And making sure that it is really purposeful. And like Lisa said, that actually schools and staff at all levels, there's that rigor around that, consistency and making sure that those things are put into place, that they're being monitored and reviewed, and actually that we're measuring the progress that the children are making, because they've got to have really smart targets on there, because even if you've got an EHCP, they're written with really long-term outcomes, and sometimes some of those targets are quite fluffy, and actually they still need breaking down. So ISP should be in place for those children on top of an EHCP, and those children that don't have an EHCP should have one that are on SEND support. But making sure their targets are really specific, what provision is in place that makes it different to quality first teaching or basic adaptations, put those on there by all means. But then, like I said, measuring the impact of that and making sure that they are reviewed so that the child doesn't have the same targets for 3 years in a row, because actually clearly something's not working there, is it?
Yeah, and I actually absolutely love the word fluffy, Jenny. That was great. Everyone loved it. The one question I have is the EHCPs take a long time to kind of go through. Are these ISPs going to take that amount of time, or are they going to be quicker? How is that going to work?
When you say they take a lot of time to go through, do you mean they take a lot of time to get one?
Correct, yeah.
So in my opinion, actually, at the point where a child's come in, you've kind of followed your processes in terms of identifying that there's a need there, you've put some support in place. Actually, at the point where you're putting additional support in place, that ISP or that IEP should come into play. If you're offering something that is different to, what is normally available within a classroom, straight away that provision comes in, and about measuring what you're doing and what is the point of that. And actually, if that's had a real significant impact, it's working. And I always kind of compare to, if you had a child that struggled to walk and they needed a walking frame to be able to get from A to B, you wouldn't take that walking frame away from them because they need that to be able to get to where they want to go. Well, it's the same for a child that might have an additional need that has an ISP. If something is working, why would you take that away? And there does come a point where, you might say, actually, this isn't working anymore, or we need to adapt it, or we need to change it. But those things need to be in place as soon as possible so that you can measure the impact of whether something is working or not, and make sure that these children are not just surviving in schools, actually they're thriving and they're achieving everything that they possibly can. And actually, if they don't get to age-related expectation, or they're not getting to where they need to be at the end of year 6, well, actually look at the progress, look at the significant progress that they've made as an individual child in their journey, in their primary, secondary education, and then it being measurable for them so that everybody can see, do you know what? These children are doing really well as individuals, and we've got to keep that in our mind, that every single one of these children, our young people, are individuals, and their offer has to be different every time.
And I think I would hope that, Josh, that they would take less time, because I guess, you know, one of the reasons that EHCPs do take so long is because they have to go through multiple stages. Like Megan's talked, you know, it is a legal document, and it has to, you know, be reviewed by the local authority, and it has to be, you know, have all this evidence collected, and it might be, you know, that they have, you know, assessments with an educational psychologist through the local authority that we know that there is a huge shortage of. And so it's, you know, it's all of these stages that then create the delay. And my hope would be that, you know, schools, you know, I know that SENCOs are incredibly overrun and, you know, have lots of children to kind of support, but my hope would be that they are able to identify those children's needs and go through that with a parent in a much more timely manner than the full EHCP process takes.
Yeah, and absolutely there should be, because there aren't all those external factors involved, are they? That there is very much a document between the school and the parent, both who know that child. I think what takes EHCPs a long time sometimes is that they go to other people who often don't know that child, haven't met that child, and you're waiting for things to come backwards and forwards. So it would naturally be a lot quicker.
Yeah, from a parent perspective, someone who's gone through the process of getting both an EHCP and an IEP, it was, at the moment, it is definitely quicker to get that IEP in place. I think it's a while ago now, but I feel like once we have the conversation with school, it really was a case of them just pulling together notes. Okay, let's think, because they were already putting loads of support in place for my daughter anyway. So it's more a case of, right, let's pull it all together into one place and list everything out that we're doing, make sure it's all on the document, think about what it is that we want the end result to be and what effect we want it to have on the child. And then that got sent over to me, and I read through it, asked for a few changes or additions, and it got revised. So I think it was literally like 1 to 2 weeks max in terms of a process, whereas the EHCP was, I feel like, is it like they have a deadline? Is it like in 11 weeks or something? Once they start one bit of the,
but
is it 20 weeks?
Met in most areas.
Yeah. So it was, whether we were lucky with timing or what, but it was within their time frame. It didn't run over, which was good. From a, I guess, slightly different perspective, I guess one of the things that does concern me a little bit about the idea of moving away from EHCPs and moving towards more IEPs is whether or not there would still be the staging where an educational psychologist comes in. Lucy, I think you just mentioned that then, because that for us was one of, I would say, the most impactful bits of the whole process. The educational psychologist was absolutely amazing and spent a good few hours with my eldest daughter in school and just totally got it. And like my concern as a parent of 2 children who are very, very highly masculine is always that people just won't see what it is that they need to see in order to get the process done. And I'd kind of already convinced myself in that way that we do as parents of kind of setting ourselves up for disappointment. I'd kind of already coached myself, said, you know what, Megan, it's probably, you know, she's going to go in, Liv's going to be really uncomfortable in this situation, really uncomfortable with her. And she's just going to highly mask, and she's not going to communicate in a way where she's able to kind of communicate her needs and her support needs, and they just won't see enough evidence. And actually, it was completely the opposite. And the educational psychologist was absolutely amazing at connecting with Olivia. And she wrote this huge report, and she spent a good, I would say, nearly 2 hours on the phone with me initially after she'd met with my daughter. talking me through everything, telling me all of the different signs and all of the little different things that she saw that really indicated what kind of support it was that my daughter needed. And it was amazing. It was a real eye opener. And then that resulted in a really long report. I think it was like pages and pages long of evidence. And that went towards the EHCP. And we also did send that, and then that also went to the team who were doing her autism assessment, as well as some additional clinical evidence. And that was amazing. Now, if we hadn't have been able to start the process of getting an EHCP, I think that would never have happened. So my concern would be, as a parent, how do we plug that gap? Like, if that's taken away the opportunity for them to spend time with an educational psychologist, what's the impact of that going to be on the children and on the support that is offered? And how do we address that? It's a massive question that I don't think we can really answer right now, but it's something to be aware of.
I would also worry about that, Megan, because their role is to come in and, they're specialists in that area. They have that additional training in that area, and they, are privileged to be able to spend that time with families to pull that together and to provide that evidence. And I think it needs to be a both and approach. Schools contribute so much because they see that child every day in that setting and can contribute so much. But the additional information that can come from those specialist assessments is really key to getting the right support in place. Met a lovely lad last week, I'm sure his family won't mind me saying, who's, got to secondary school age and has a profound learning disability that has never been picked up before. And so I think if there isn't that specialist assessment earlier on, we risk some children continuing to fall through the gaps.
Yeah, and I would, from a school perspective as well, I don't envisage us stopping engaging with educational psychologists, because often that is what helps us to help our staff to know exactly what to put into place. So just because it wasn't to inform an EHCP, I don't envisage that we wouldn't still access that support for those children, because I think sometimes those reports are really useful for those reasons that you've just mentioned, and for parents, but also for school staff. I think sometimes that can be the thing that changes what we can offer in school, because we aren't the specialists in that, and sometimes that's really helpful to get that perspective, to make sure that what support they're getting is tailored correctly to that child. So I don't envisage that going away.
Great. I'm going to have to bump in here to go to the next question. I know that we could talk on this for forever. Just talking about all of this, what do you think families most need from the system going forward?
I think it was Lisa that said this earlier, but I would really agree. Like, families need to be believed.
Yeah,
like above and beyond everything, families need to be believed. They don't need systems that say, your child isn't struggling, your child isn't finding this hard, because what we see is that some children will hold that in for years and years and years, and then they land on my doorstep because they are severely traumatized, overwhelmed, and burnt out. And we really need the system to believe these children and these families and these teachers at times when they're shouting about it, to know that school is impossibly difficult for some children, and that there are things that can be put in place to support those children to thrive, academically, socially, and meet their potential within an education environment.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's nothing harder than, from the parent perspective this time, I flip it the opposite way. There's nothing harder than going into a school and explaining kind of the evenings that you have when your child completely displays the opposite character every day at school. And I think that's around education for school staff as well, and them understanding that actually that is sometimes what happens, that children can present very differently. They become experts at hiding the way that they feel often, and a parent's not just going to make those things up, and we need to listen to their experience and what that child is living with and what that family is living with. And I think that's crucial. So I think the working in partnership with parents and schools is vitally important, but it's going to be even more so. So around those ISPs, it's going to need to be very much working together. And if parents aren't sure that children are getting that support, to keep checking and to make sure and to ask for another review and to not be apologetic for that, because I think that's our job as a school, to make sure that we are meeting those children's needs. So yeah, I would say that's huge.
Yeah, I totally agree, Lisa. I think a lot of it comes down to a few simple things, really. Like everyone said, listening and just knowing that, no parent wants to be in this situation where they're desperately trying to navigate getting the support that the children need. Nobody is going to be making any of this stuff up. So listening to people and believing what they're experiencing is so massively important, as well as consistency. We talked a bit about consistency earlier, consistency of support across all settings and all staff. And kind of maintenance, I guess, it maybe is not the right word, but somebody, I think it might have been, was it Jenny or was it Lisa? Somebody said earlier about, it was Jenny saying about if you need something, if somebody needs something in order to help them get to where they're going to, then why would you take that away? And we've definitely, although school have been absolutely amazing and so supportive and put so much in place, we have been in a situation a few times where things are in place and going really smoothly, and then things start to derail a bit, and I'm there sat there thinking, like, what is going on? Why is everything suddenly become really hard? Why are we seeing these huge explosions again? Why are we seeing this? And then it'll turn out that, oh well, we did stop doing this because we felt like it wasn't needed anymore. And it's like, well, actually, it's needed because you're not seeing that it's needed, if that makes sense. So it's almost like a double negative. Like, if it's working, you won't see any evidence of it. But if you take it away and then it's not working, because you do see all the evidence because they're struggling. So I think kind of that belief to just maintain things that are working, keep them in place, and trust that you're doing the right thing and that you do know what your child needs.
And the two-way communication as well. So like the school keeping parents informed if anything is changing or has changed, and likewise at home, if something has happened at home or something has changed, the school being informed about that so that you can work together to mitigate what effect might be for those children.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely.
Fantastic. Oh, sorry, Megan.
Sorry,
go on. No, go on. You're fine.
Really quick final one. I was just going to say that just made me think. As a parent as well, I'm definitely guilty of occasionally thinking, oh God, can I really bring myself to ring them or email them again this week? Because I don't want to be, kind of burden. I know how busy everybody is, but it's that thing of just actually, I think school really appreciate that open communication and that sharing of details about your child and what they're struggling with at home and what's happening in their home life, so that school can be as prepared as possible. So don't listen to that voice that says, oh, I don't want to be annoying. Like, do be annoying. They won't find it annoying. They want that communication with you about your child. I think that's really important. I'll stop talking now.
No, it's fine, Dora. I guess we're running a bit short on time, but it's okay because we've got some questions coming in. Next part of the webinar is to open it up to question and answers from the audience who are watching tonight. So if you are watching and haven't posted a question yet, but haven't have a question but haven't, just please add it in and we'll try and get to it. Okay, so I'm gonna just look this way a second just to read the questions, and then you'll see my forehead as I lean in to read them. I'm an ADHD dear, and I'm supporting my 16-year-old ADHD son. I'm concerned about the possible withdrawal of legal backup, but hopeful of increased SLT as I'm an SLT student. What would early SLT mean for you?
I'm going to be the first one to put my hand up and say I'm not sure what SLT means. I'm not very good
Oh,
with
sorry.
acronyms.
Okay.
Speech and language therapy.
Speech language
Sorry.
therapy.
Yeah, I did know that
Another
one.
acronym. I'm so sorry.
I think from my perspective, often I meet perhaps, older children who are, presenting with lots of, mental health, psychological difficulties. And actually, they have an underlying speech language or communication difference that maybe, hasn't been identified or has been masked, or, people think the right support is in place. But actually what we know from research is there is a huge overlap between speech language communication differences and mental health needs. I often liken it to, being in a different country and not speaking the language, and like trying to tell people what your needs are, or, being in an emergency situation, someone having an accident in another country and being like, oh, can you help me with this, and not being understood. And that is what it must feel like every day for children with speech language communication differences and difficulties. So I think if we can get that SLT support in place for children sooner, we would mitigate some of that. And I also know that, children who are verbal and do go on to develop those speech and language, that spoken speech and language, emotional literacy is one of the best things that we can teach our children, to be able to label their emotions and communicate to other people how they're feeling. And so from my perspective as a psychologist, often I will refer people to speech and language therapists before they come and see me, because I think that is part of the work, to be able to help them to access the work that I do.
I would agree. So we would really appreciate kind of early interventions in the early years, because often those things can be missed, particularly. So my school, for example, we have many second language learners, so that's an added complication for some of our children. But having that specialist support as early as possible would really help how those children are able to articulate the way that they're feeling. And I think you're right, Lucy, that the emotional literacy is crucial in being able to thrive and being able to get the support that you need. So yeah, the earlier the better.
Can I just add in there? I think actually, we talk about early intervention, but not just at the point where these children reach an educational setting. There's got to be more done before these children get to school. And, lots of you have talked about there's no support until a child reaches a certain age. Or, I've spoken to lots of parents and they'll say, well, I raised my concerns with the health visitor and they said, oh, well, school will deal with it when they get to school. There's got to be so much more before some of these children get to school to get the right foundation in place for them, so that they're ready to come into an academic setting.
Can I make a really quick plug here for anyone who doesn't know about the charity Speech and Language UK? Their website is speechandlanguage.org.uk, and they provide lots of really helpful free advice for parents. They have like a advice line that you can book calls on. It's really hard to get a call because they're obviously really oversubscribed. But they also have free webinars about different topics to do with early speech and language development. It's really fantastic organisation.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dr. Lucy. We will add that into the email. Everyone will get an email who's watching this tonight. If you didn't register online and you've joined just because you saw it online, if you just go onto our website, noahsplace.org.uk, send us an email and we'll get all the information that we've talked about tonight over via email. Great. And then another question that's come in, Kishware, I think I pronounce your name. I'm not going to read your whole question because I think we've covered a lot of it. But one of the big things that I see here in this question is who will assess or decide who is complex and who is not? Maybe that's on the white paper if you guys have studied. Jenna, I can see. Lisa, I can see you've unmuted.
$1 million question.
That is
I don't
a big
have an answer
question.
to that.
Nobody has the answer to that. It's a very broad term, isn't it? And nobody knows what that really means yet, unfortunately.
But I think, we've not really talked about the consultation period, and I have looked through it, and I don't think that's particularly accessible for all sorts of reasons. There's a lot of questions on there. They're quite hard to understand and digest, but actually responding to the consultation and making it very clear around actually what does complex mean, and actually do we need to give our own definitions of what a complex child is and what that looks like, so that we're all really clear on that, because there isn't anything out there at the moment that defines what a complex child is.
So the Department of Education on their Instagram page, I've just got it up because I saw they actually responded to a question about this last week. So they have written that complex is about support that goes beyond what a mainstream school can routinely provide day to day. So I imagine for me, knowing that how impossibly hard it is to get the EHCP for lots of families, it will mean that all the families that I see will still meet that threshold for EHCP because they all can't, they all need more than what is just provided day to day. That's why EHCPs exist, but that is what they've said so far.
Yeah, that is a little bit of an annoying definition because as you say, that's also when we were going through the process of getting an IEP, so the kind of like level down, if you like, at the moment before an EHCP, that's the definition for that as well, that a lot of schools use. They will say, oh, if your child needs more than the standard kind of day to day, then you need an IEP. So it surely will need to be something much more specific and actually defined than that.
And maybe some more certainty around actually what does it mean if you're a complex child? How does the offer change if I'm complex or I'm not complex? And it's kind of breaking that down and what that looks like for people, isn't it?
Great, thank you. I'm just trying to read the questions whilst you guys are answering them so I can get prepared for the next one. Okay, the next question is, what should I do if I feel my child isn't getting the support they need at school?
Can I go first on this one? Use your voice, I guess, is what I would say in the first instance, which I'm sure you are doing, but actually you are the voice for your child, you are their advocate, and actually you have to be the one that stands up for them and make sure that they are getting what they need. Have the conversations with the people that you need to speak to the teacher, speak to SENCO, go above them if you need to, speak to the head teacher. Are they in a trust? Do you need to go further than that? I like to think that actually at the point where you go in and you ask for support, are you raising your concerns that someone is listening to you? But obviously you've asked that question, so you don't feel like that's there at the moment, but don't be afraid to go higher than the person that is either not giving you the answers or ignoring what you're saying to them, because you have to fight for your child.
And I would be really specific as well. So asking questions like, so what specific support is in place for my child? How are you measuring their progress? Can I see the written evidence of what their plan is? Can you explain how that is delivered? So asking all of those details about those things that the school might say is in place, but making sure that that is actually happening and going back again and again to check that that is happening.
I totally agree with that. And from a parent who's had to kind of, although we have had in general an amazing experience through school with their support, there have been situations where we've had to kind of go back. And as Lisa says, it was very important to ask really specific questions. Also, I would say write everything down, keep it, because you will want to refer back to things sometimes, and you might want to be able to say, look, I asked you about this 2 weeks ago, I asked you about this 3 weeks ago. Now I need to know what is being done, what's in place, what has changed, what's been done differently to try and address this. So do make sure that you're recording the communications and keeping them so that you can reference them. And there was another thing as well. Oh yeah, and as Jenny said, do speak to the head teacher as well. I've found that really helpful in a few instances where it's just needed a little bit of a different perspective on it and a little bit more of a senior approach to it as well. As we know, everyone working in generally, I would say, everyone I've experienced working in schools has got they've got the welfare of the children at heart, and they want the children to be as comfortable and as supported as possible. But, they're very busy. They're dealing with different challenges in class. They sometimes not always have the same level of training around these things as well. We've identified that. We've mentioned earlier how, consistent training is something that could do with being improved on. And so just sometimes bringing it to a slightly senior level can be really helpful. So don't be afraid to do that.
I would also add, sorry. I was just going to say, I would also add kind of keeping your own evidence about what's happening at home, because that's often a great indicator of whether what is in place at school is actually working. or not. So keeping records of what's going on at home as well, I think, is really important.
Two organisations that I would really plug for people if they're not getting support or they can't get, they're taking that higher and it's not being supported. So every local authority, wherever you are in the country, will have a SENDIAS team. It might be called something different, but to have a look into SENDIAS or whatever it's called in your area. It's a local authority team, but it's independent of your school, and they will provide you with advocacy. And there's also IPSI, which is the national charity, that again provide support calls, again really oversubscribed, so really hard to get a call with them. But also lots of training. So as a parent, you can go and do the legal training through IPSI, so you understand the legalities of, this is all about to change, but the legalities of EHCP. So I'd really recommend that for anyone who's feeling like they're shouting and still not being heard.
Great, amazing. There is one question. I can see lots of questions coming in. What we will do with the questions, and I'm sure the panel will be happy with this, I will send the questions to them, all the questions that have come through, and they can collate their answers, and we can put it out on our social media through the week, answering your questions. But there is this one question that I would want to come to really quickly. But Dr. Lucy, I'm going to ask it directly to you, if that's okay. What signs should I look for that my child might need additional support? I'm really sorry. I know that this could be a really broad answer.
Yeah, and it is really hard, isn't it? I think, I think that generally families are not taught what typical development looks like in their child. We don't get taught, I have a family myself, we don't get taught what typical development looks like. And so we don't have anything to compare it to. We might have, multiple children, so we might be making comparisons between siblings, or we might have friends, or, our own siblings that have children. But I think, often that comparison is not helpful. So I think one of the really key things is understanding what typical development is. And if your child is not developing typically, then to do something about that. So whether that is, their motor skills are delayed, their communication skills are delayed, they're the really key things that I would be initially thinking about earlier on in a child's life, in terms of, key indicators. Is their development in line with their peers? And as they get older, I think Jenny said earlier, if they're progressing well in their timeline, then that's fantastic. But equally, if they're significant, if they're 2-3 years behind their peers, then we would want to understand a little bit more about what's going on. So I think they'd be like big, I don't want to call them red flags, but big, flashing lights to me that we need to understand a little bit more about what's going on for that child. And then I think in terms of their kind of psychological health and their mental well-being, I think, changes in behaviour. So if you have a sensitive child that has always presented as really highly sensitive, you might have, tried to shout about that a little bit earlier to try and get that support in place. But if you have a child whose behaviour suddenly changes, is different, then I would be really thinking there about, what is it that's made that change? Are they more distressed? Are they not eating the same as they usually would? Are they more withdrawn from the family? Have they stopped doing their hobbies? I'd be really thinking about any changes in behaviour, to try and understand. I think of it like that iceberg, like stopping eating is what we see on the top of that iceberg. What is underneath that is driving that change in behaviour? So we can think about how to support that. That might be the first sign that something is not going well kind of in school. Okay.
Great. Does anybody want to really quickly add to that, or are we happy with that? Great. Okay. Really, really quickly, I'm going to ask the panel for a one-sentence answer, and if it's longer than a sentence, you're going to the head teacher's office. Okay, so what is the most important thing parents should understand about SEND reforms? Jenny, we'll go to you first.
That this is their opportunity to voice their concerns, or opinions, or thoughts, or feelings around the SEND system. And I keep saying, I understand that parents are fighting a battle every single day, and actually some parents are done fighting at this point, but you almost, in my opinion, can't have an opinion if you haven't contributed towards it. So I think it's vital that you use this period of time to respond to the consultation.
Great. Dr. Lucy?
Oh, one sentence is really hard, isn't it? I was sucked into what Jenny was saying, and I've completely lost what I thought in my head. One sentence. This isn't set in stone right now. You have the power to change this. to take, I know this is really hard, saying from, but to take some of the emotion out of it and think practically, how can I present the practical evidence of how this is going to negatively impact my child and other children's lives so that change can be created longer term.
Fantastic. And Megan?
So it's such a difficult thing to do, Josh. I don't know why you've done that.
Sorry.
I would say from a parent perspective, I'll try and be quick. From a parent perspective, that just keep being informed, stay informed, keep following what's happening with it, stay involved and be persistent in advocating for your child. So no matter what the changes are that start to come, make sure that you use your voice and that you keep shouting for what it is that your child specifically needs within that framework. As parents, I'm not sure what else we can do that is more effective than that.
Lisa, we've got someone coming to your office. I'm kidding. Lisa, over to you.
So mine would be, to echo Jenny, fill in that consultation and talk to your schools. So if your children are in a school and you look at that really overwhelming consultation of 39 questions, and some of them I would struggle to answer straight off, go to your school, ask if you can have some time to talk it through. Schools will be happy to discuss it with you.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of the SEND reform, what families need to know right now. Thank you so much to our panel and to everyone who's joined us tonight. If there is one message that we hope families take away, it's that these are proposals and they are the beginning of a conversation. Nothing has changed legally yet, and the voices of families, carers, professionals and young people will just play an immense role in shaping what happens next. Systems improve when families are heard, and discussions like this help us make the voices of parents and children remain the centre of the decisions. Thank you again for being part of this conversation tonight, and we'll see you all very soon.